Hey everybody, Jason Haas here for the semi-weekly Tablas Creek Instagram live broadcast. You may have noticed, it's actually beautiful here. We finally have some weather that feels at least like spring. Doesn't quite feel like summer yet. It's supposed to be in the low 80s today. But it's lovely. Quite enjoying it. I'm actually in short sleeves for the first time at work in a while. So my guest is going to be Rich Bauwer, the CEO of Free Flow Wines, who are our partners in our kegging that we do nationally. And they are really the company that makes kegging of wine feasible nationally. We tried it before Free Flow, and the logistics were just impossible. So I can't wait to talk to him about what's going on in that world and also in his own personal world. But as I always do, while we're waiting for people to join, I am going to share some pictures as to what's going on in the vineyard. So we are most of the way through flowering, so you can see a relatively early grape like Syrah. You can see some little berries there. I have another one where I look at some Grenache, and I even zoomed in a little bit more, and you can see the little berries that have formed there. That's always exciting. Because we've had a relatively cool spring, we were at least a little worried that we would see a decent amount of shatter, which means that the flowers don't fertilize completely and you end up with missing berries and a loss of production. And it looks like we saw a tiny bit of that in some of the more shatter-prone varieties, but things look healthy enough and robust enough that we're not worried about it. At the same time, we have some grapes that are still right in the middle of flowering. So, for example, Mourvèdre, which looks more or less like what I showed Grenache looking like 2 weeks ago, or Counoise, which is similar. So it's important to remember that something like flowering it's on a continuum of time. It's not an event that happens to all of the grapes at the same time, nor is it an event that happens even throughout the vineyard at the same time. So there are Grenache blocks that are a week or two ahead of others, depending on whether they're in warmer spots or cooler spots. In addition to that, we have been working on some planting in a couple of different places. So the most exciting for us is about 4 acres of Roussanne that we put in just this week. We've been desperately short of Roussanne, partly because of a frost that we had last year, partially because of some blocks that we pulled out because they had virus and they were unproductive. So getting 4 good acres of Roussanne in is so exciting for us. We've also been working on our little experimental block in front of the winery where we've been grafting. We planted rootstocks last year. We've been grafting new varieties as we have on there. We will ultimately have all 14 of the Chateauneuf varieties that we have there right in front of the winery where people can go and see them easily, and we can take tours and show different sorts of trellising and all of that. So it's a dry farmed, no-till block, and it's just downhill from the winery itself. And then finally, in the cellar, we are getting ready to bottle our whites, the estate whites from 2022. So we've got Grenache Blanc and Viognier. We've got Bourbelanc. We've got Marsanne. Apologize in advance. We do not have things like Roussanne or Picpoul or even the Côte de Tablas Blanc as we normally would because of how short the whites were last year. So that's it. That's what's going on at the winery. I'm going to stop sharing, and now I am going to invite Rich to join me. And let me look. There it is. Okay. So I just sent the invitation through, and hopefully you will see that, and we'll be live momentarily. Hey, excellent. How you doing, Rich?
I'm great, Jason. How are you today?
Great. I like the setup. This is very on brand.
Yeah, there you go. Got the kegs, got the kegerator. We're ready to go.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me join. I'm a big fan of you and what you do at the winery, and your thought leadership with the podcast. So it's quite humbling to be here today. So I'm looking forward to the next hour.
It's only half an hour, I hope.
Oh, okay.
Barring something very surprising, I try to keep these to a half hour. So,
right.
But I always like to start by asking people to kind of share their journey into wine. Was wine something that you knew you wanted to work in as you were growing up? Was it on your family table, or was it something you came to later?
Always enjoyed wine. Right out of college, I was an investment banker. I moved to New York and I was working on Wall Street. It was interesting, fast paced, fun work. It just wasn't me. It was square peg, round hole, and I just knew it wasn't the right place for me. So when I decided to make a change, I said I'm going to go someplace where there's a physical product I love. And my job offers were things like sporting good companies with Jeff O'Neill, Neil wetsuits, wineries, those sorts of things. But I really had to have that connection to a product and think, okay, someone's going to take that product home and enjoy it. And that was incredibly meaningful for me. And so wine was one of a couple of industries I looked at. And now I've been 35 years in wine. So yeah,
Um,
watch out. It gets in your blood.
yeah, well, it was started out in my blood, so I didn't have I barely had a choice.
Yeah.
Um, so do you have a wine that you remember, like the first wine that you remember really making an impact on you?
Well, it's actually kind of the opposite. I remember my first couple of dates and going down a wine aisle and thinking, how do I make a decision? I'm looking at, hundreds of varietals, appellations, imports, and I want to get a nice wine for a date. And went over and asked the store manager in the wine shop, help me out here. How do I make a decision here? And I would say things I tell people who aren't in the wine industry is just how complicated it is. People think about the end product, but they don't think about everything that goes in the vineyard, in the winery, and the marketing, and all the different aspects that are involved in the distribution, in the packaging. There's so many complicated elements involved in getting a wine in front of a consumer, and people don't really understand that. And then I think there's a lot we can do with the consumer on the shelf to just make wine more approachable, make it easier for some 21-year-old legal drinking age person who's going down that wine aisle looking for a wine for a date to figure out. No, but I like big reds. I like Marsans and Rossans, which you guys make great one of. So there's a lot of different wines. I like Viogniers. I have a pretty broad palate in wines.
So you kind of cut your teeth at some really big wineries like Beringer and
Yeah.
Gallo. What were your roles What were your roles like in those places?
So at Gallo was an interesting organization when I joined it. This was in the 90s. They were just going through a generational change. Ernest was stepping back from the business. Julio passed away my second year. And the company had grown quite dramatically. So it had grown from a couple hundred SKUs and 500 million in sales to several billion and thousands of SKUs. So the organization structure that was very tightly held family control, all decisions went to Ernest and Julio, really wasn't working anymore. And I was a little bit too vocal in trying to explain to them other ways of organizing a business. And watch out, you criticize something, you own it. So they actually put me in charge of re-engineering the company, which was a pretty heavy burden for a 24-year-old. And I tried to talk him out of it. I thought there were other senior people who would be better at doing a job like that. It was just so massive. Um, but they ended up staying with me, and we talked about everything from how flexible their production was to how they distributed, to how they wanted to organize and reward salespeople. And it was an incredible 3-year journey. And a lot of times when you're doing that kind of remaking of a company, it's a question of, what's optimal from a business school perspective? What's the best possible way of doing it? And then you have to ask, what can a company successfully implement at that stage in their evolution? And with the Gallows at that stage, you also had to ask, what can they all agree to? Because you were going through a generational change, and Joe and David and Jim Coleman and Bob Gallo were also trying to figure out their roles in the company as co-presidents and how that was going to work and what did it mean for them. So in addition to what could the company successfully implement, it was what did the family want to do. So it was a fascinating time there at about 4 years, and then I got recruited away to Beringer, which was a wonderful just before they sold to Foster's, and I had the job of supply chain and winery operations for the 8 wineries that they owned at that time, different wineries than Treasury owns nowadays. But it was a different winery every day, different winemaker every day, trying to balance making exceptional wines with having a good economic return. And it was a really enjoyable role. I had a lot of fun in that job.
At what point did you decide that kind of the packaging side of things was of particular interest?
Well, I mean, the packaging was always a huge part. And as part of being at Beringer, my focus initially was cellar operations, bottling, crush and fermenting and those sorts of things, but also purchasing. And it was a definitely a fast lane introduction to how critical packaging is and to how many minute details there are in a label, or in a glass bottle. It was definitely a wide open eyes education, being in charge of that big of a spend for those prestigious brands and really learning everything I could about labels and bottles and everything else. And then I got recruited away. The Sachs brothers, who had a liquor packaging business on the East Coast, had bought California Glass and Dentos Glass, and they recruited me to run their beer and wine business, for glass bottles and cardboard packaging. And we took it through a couple of changes with ownership, from the family Sylvanis to the Gallo to the Sachs brothers to private equity to a new private equity. Doubled the size of the business. And it was a time of turmoil as well. The glass plants were reducing the number of glass plants. More Chinese imports were coming in. So it was a fascinating time to be there.
And you've been at Free Flow now, what, 5 years?
5 years. 5 years this week.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So when did Free Flow first get on your radar, and how did that connection with them happen?
Well, the connection happened, like a lot of things in the wine industry, through people I'd worked with before. So Walt Clens, who was chairman of Beringer when I was there, is also on the board at Free Flow. And so Walt introduced me to our founder, Jordan Kittelstadt, who I'm sure you know as well. And I do want to reach out and say, we all owe everything kegging to Jordan. It was his idea, and it started, like all good startups, in a garage in San Francisco, with him and a lot of sweat equity, really inventing the category and doing all those early hard years of convincing the first few restaurants to try it, because there was nowhere to go see it when he was first doing that. But Walt said, hey, we're looking for somebody who's got a lot of operational capability to help scale this business. And when I heard about the concept, I just fell in love immediately. As a beer drinker, whenever I go into a bar, I ask, what do you have on tap? Because it's going to be fresher, and I enjoy it more than getting it out of a bottle or a can. And so I just immediately said, well, yeah, I mean, at the wineries, everyone falls in love with the romance of the wooden barrel, but most of the time the wine's in an upright stainless steel tank. And so I just looked at a keg and went, hey, that's a small stainless steel tank. The wine's going to be perfectly preserved in that. It makes a lot of sense. You're not going to get any oxidation when you pour. Why isn't everybody doing this? And knew I wanted to be part of that and that revolution.
So I'm guessing, maybe not, given that it's Tablas Creek and it's Free Flow whose audience is watching this, but I'm guessing that there are a decent number of wine people and wine lovers who you talk to who don't even know that wine on tap, wine in keg is a thing. Do you have like an elevator pitch for why people who maybe this isn't on their radar, why they should take a serious look at it?
We do. Yeah, we've got that 2-minute speech. And thanks for the opportunity to make our pitch. I mean, it all starts with the quality. When you're going into a restaurant, and the people watching this are all knowledgeable about wine, when you go into a restaurant, most of the wine consumed on premise is drunk by the glass, not full bottles. And a lot of us in the industry want to ask the question, how long has that bottle been open? Is that a bottle that you opened an hour ago and I'm getting the second glass out of it? Or was it opened 5 days ago and I'm getting the last glass out of it? Because of that wine quality. And that's the first element in terms of the elevator pitch, is it's improved the wine quality of wine by the glass, which is 50 million 900 cases in the United States. And so taste and quality is the first bit of it, but then you get into the economics. Things have to be both a good idea and good economics to work. And this is because the liquid waste is so much less. We talk to restaurants, maybe you're going to reduce your liquid waste by 10 or 15%. And I don't want to misquote you, but you had the experience in your own tasting room when you put kegs in. You had a higher percentage of liquid waste that was eliminated. I can't remember what number you
Yeah,
said.
it was about 30%, we
Yeah,
figured, just in terms of the difference between what we actually poured, and we track what we poured to guests, and what we actually opened. Because if it gets to the end of a day and we've got less than a third of a bottle, like, that goes home with the staff. It
yeah.
doesn't.
You don't
We're
want
not
to
going to.
serve that to somebody tomorrow. You don't want
No,
to.
definitely not.
No, so I mean, a 30% increase in or decrease in liquid waste is all profitability for that restaurant. So it's economically incredibly advantageous for the restaurant and less labor. It takes much less time to pour 5 or 10 glasses out of a tap handle than it does to open bottles, check them, and maintain those bottles and the empty bottles at the end of the day. And then there's the sustainability piece, which is now what everyone wants to talk about, but everyone's getting woken up to the fact that the single biggest element of carbon footprint of wine is the glass bottle itself, is the manufacturer, the melting of that sand, the forming of that bottle, the shipping of that bottle if it's imported from France or Italy or China. And then when you distribute the full bottles, that going out there, that's the single biggest element. There's important stuff being done in the vineyard with biofarming and other areas with solar. But if you want to impact the carbon footprint of your wine, the single thing you can do is do something like use a reusable container, a keg. The stainless steel is going to last decades and get reused hundreds of times in its lifestyle, gets rid of 3/4 of the carbon footprint of the glass. And so, that sustainability element, when we talk, when in the elevator speech, that's the last thing I bring up because it's kind of the slam dunk home run. Of course, kegs are better for the environment. But if it's not a good economic deal for the restaurant or the winery, people aren't going to do it. So you have to start with how'd you like to get rid of 15% of your liquid waste or 30% of your liquid waste and have that much more profitability or the ability to offer wine by the glass at a better price and attract people to drink wines rather than cocktails. So there's, was more than 2 minute speech. Sorry.
No, but I mean, I think it's so clear. It's such a like a win-win-win,
Right.
where it's better for the wine, it's better for the cost, it's better for the environment, it's better for the
Well, I mean,
waste.
I feel so lucky. We were talking a couple of employees last night, is that some companies struggle for what's your mission, what's your vision,
Right.
what's the compelling reason for your employees to get up and come to work every day. And for us, it's obvious. I mean, we're revolutionizing how wine is served, and it is a win in all dimensions. It's better profitability for the restaurant, and it's better for the environment. It's getting rid of most of the carbon footprint. So if you can win in all dimensions simultaneously, you've got a better mousetrap, and it's gonna take over eventually. And to your point, there are still people when we say, "Hey, wine by the glass coming out of a keg," they go, "Oh, is that a thing? Or are those the cheap wines?" And no, where our average is about $13 wines, but we have kegs that are selling for $700, $800 going out the door, single vineyard Cabernets and things like that are now in kegs and being poured at nice steakhouses and very nice restaurants.
So given all of the fact that it's a win-win-win, like, what do you think? Like, what are the hurdles? Why isn't everybody doing it at this point?
Wine's a traditional product, and there are a lot of people in marketing who are afraid of what's going to happen to my brand. It's the same thing with screw caps. I mean, for years, people I don't want to be the first high-end wine to be in screw caps because I don't want to mess up my brand image. We're a luxury product. We're going to use corks. So there is a certain amount of reluctance with some wine brands and some marketing people who want the tradition of the traditional packaging. So that's part of it. It's not going to be for everybody. It's hard to take home and put a bunch of kegs in your cellar. So it's, for the wine collector, it doesn't really work. Um, it's not going to replace every wine on the wine list. It should replace your 5 biggest volume wines. You should be pouring your house Chardonnay, your house Cabernet, your house, Zinfandel out of a keg because it's going to work better for you in all aspects. And then there is a disruption to the restaurant. They have to put the kegerator in or change a kegerator. One of our big growth opportunities this year is because beer is declining, unfortunately. There are tap handles that are either not connected or they're underutilized. They're not selling enough beer to make that last keg. If you had 8 beer handles, you should take your slowest selling beer off and put an everyday white on. It's the exact same equipment. you want to push with nitrogen. It's also a cold wine. But
Right.
if you put a standard nice Chardonnay on there, you might make your customers happy because not everybody coming in, that whole family doesn't necessarily want to drink beer, and your profits are going to go up. So that's sort of the easiest one for us in terms of opportunities right now is to say, well, if you've already got a kegerator, how many beers do you have on tap? And if you've got 6 or 8 or 10 or 20, take one off and put on an everyday product and serve wine by the glass and see how much you like it. We seldom have somebody stop serving from tap. Once they've got it and their bar staff loves it and they see the better usage, they want to expand those programs. But if they're going from always pouring wine by the glass just from bottles and they don't have a kegerator, there's a disruption and there's an investment for the restaurant. Their payback's under 6 months, but it's still a disruption.
I mean, we did the math for ourselves because we needed to get 3 kegerators, basically 3 dispensing systems, because we have potentially as many as 24 different wines that we might potentially have to serve for people. And we were like, oh, this is kind of a big investment. And we actually did the math as to how much this was going to save us in packaging and in lost wine. And it was like 9 months. It was such an eye opener when we did that math that like it's not like a multi-year return on investment. It's so fast.
It is very fast, but restaurants are struggling. I mean, they got smacked around very badly during COVID, and they've got ongoing staffing issues. So even if they agree with you that with me, it's a 6 month, or with you, it's a 9 month payback, they still have a lot of priorities to make the restaurants work right now. So we understand that the decision making is not always a fast yes when it's disruptive, even if it is going to have a very fast payback. But that's a lot of what we do. We're out educating ourselves with restaurant chains and hotel chains. We're educating the distributor wholesaler sales force so they know how to talk with people about it. We're out talking to winery national sales accounts so that you have the information as well to work with your favorite restaurant to say you should look at this and it's going to be a fast payback and a good idea for you, as well as saving the world, saving the environment.
So I'm happy you mentioned COVID. I mean, COVID was a huge disruption for restaurants.
Yeah.
I mean, your kegs are sold mostly in restaurants. I know on the winery side, I mean, we learned a lot during COVID. We had to learn to do things differently. Some of those things stuck, and we've continued to do them. Do you feel like that was the same thing for you all, or was it just a disaster that you had to make your way through any way you could?
It was brutal. I mean, for us, because our kegs are used to serve customers at hotels and airports and restaurants. I mean, our demand dropped 99%. When your demand drops 99% for 3 months, it's how do you survive? How do you make sure you're going to be a viable entity at the other side of this? And so 2020 and 2021 were pretty tough. We learned a lot about how long wines can be stored in a keg. The beer industry tragically had to destroy billions of gallons of beer because beer has a shelf life. All those kegs that were out in distribution during COVID, they destroyed that liquid and reclaimed the taxes. But the kegs of beer weren't going to be good 2 years later. So if you go back and look at the reports from the big companies like Budweiser and stuff, they'll tell you how much beer they destroyed during COVID, and it was stunning. We on the other hand have had some. We went and got some old kegs that are now 5 years old, pre-COVID kegs. Sat down with winemakers, tasted them, and it's great. The wine's fine. It does. It's just like if it was in a tank for that long. Now you may not want to be 2 vintages behind on your white, but the liquid's still going to be good in there. So we were able to pretty much change our recommendations for how long a wine's going to be viable inside of a keg. But yeah, it was a tough period.
I mean, that was such a proof of concept for us. I mean, back even before we were working with Free Flow. So this was like 2010 or 2011. Yeah. I think we were trying to do kegs ourselves. We ended up, I think it was 2012 that we ended up starting to work with Free Flow. But we were getting kegs back. So they would come back all covered in stickers from distributors, and we needed to scrape all that off and clean and sterilize and refill. And one of the kegs that we got back was from a vintage earlier. So it had been out at least 9 months, and more likely probably a year and a half.
And you don't know what kind of conditions. So if it was stored in temperature
it was
control.
half full.
Yep.
So I'm just assuming that At some point, somebody took it off of the tap and replaced it with something else, and realized months later that, oh, we should send this back and get our keg deposit back. And so it came back to us half full,
Yeah.
and we were thinking, oof, we should probably see how bad this is. And we tapped it, we poured it, and it was like we'd cracked open a fresh bottle. And
Wow.
it was such a dramatic proof of concept for us that this is a good thing for wine, and not just for a few months. This can go out longer than that.
I mean, what can you say? A half full keg, you know, and for people who aren't familiar, you're pushing the liquid out with nitrogen. So there is no oxidation with a half full keg. The other half is not air, it's pure nitrogen. And so yeah, a half full keg that's a year old and you don't know whether it was stored in a temperature controlled environment or not, it still tastes okay. We just had one of the high-end cab wineries, we won't name them, who put a keg in the back of their warehouse for 5 years and pulled it out and did a tasting side by side and said, it's fine, it's great, it's better in the bottle, you know. It's a little different, you know, the winemaking rules. It's kind of like, you know, because it's an anaerobic environment, you're not going to get any oxygen whatsoever. You have to be a little careful with your sulfurs and stings. But fortunately, it hasn't been going on for 12 years, and people like yourself can tell people, like, here's my sulfur if I put it in a traditional cork,
Right.
and here's my sulfur if I put it in a keg. So
yeah, it's pretty similar. I mean, we do a lot of stuff in screw caps,
yeah,
and the preparation to put it under screw cap and to put it in keg is pretty similar.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's been a good learning, and I would say the retrieval piece, we had to face some pretty tough conversations about getting kegs back from market when the kegs aren't selling and when the restaurants are closed. So we spent a lot of time talking with wineries and distributor partners about, you know, let's pay a lot of attention to what's happening with keg inventories out there and returning kegs, and how do we get these back.
Yeah, I mean, that logistics piece of getting kegs back, that's always been the part that I've been most impressed by, because when we were doing it ourselves, like, we just were doing it in California.
Right.
I mean, we convinced our California wholesaler that they could pick the kegs back up, and when there was enough of them, we would run a truck up to their warehouse and bring it back to the winery. But like, we would have distributors in other states ask about it, and we'd just be like, yeah, there's just no way. Like,
Well,
there's no way we could ever
I mean,
make that work economically, but you have.
that's why we exist, because, you know, Jordan invented wine on tap with kegs, but he didn't invent kegs. And with the breweries, you've got the same thing. If a local brewery, down your area, Firestone Walker, or up here, you know, Bear Republic or someone, is only distributing locally, they can afford to run a truck to the local towns, drop kegs off, pick up empties. If you're dealing with a wholesaler who's in Los Angeles or San Francisco, you can manage the shipping of the kegs returning. Once you start going interstate, it's never going to make sense for you to go into that restaurant in Dallas and pick up one keg. You know, that there's a natural economy of scale there, that because I'm already in there picking up 20 kegs, bringing back full pallets and full trucks from Dallas, it makes sense for you to use a service like us and use our kegs when you're shipping out of state. And that's a lot of why we exist, is because wineries are sold nationally. We're in all 50 states. I mean, we're in 9,000 locations across the 50 states now. So it's great to see the spread, but, you know, why we exist is because it's not going to be economical for you to go to Colorado or New Mexico or Nevada, much less Virginia.
Yeah, it did. It just opened up the whole country to this, that in a way that would never have been possible before.
Right. Yeah. Well, we're happy to work with you.
So is there, I know with the wine world's increasing focus on sustainability, I think that's brought a lot of focus to kegs that just from directions that it might not have gotten before. Is there a piece of recognition that you're particularly proud of?
Wow. That's a good question. I mean, I think just the totals. If you just look, if you go to our website, we keep a running total of how many pounds of waste we have kept out of landfill. And, you know, when you start to talk about tens of millions and 50 million, you know, pounds of waste, you know, these are just strong astronomical numbers. It really adds up over time. And so when we start to talk about individual brands like yourself, who've been with us for a decade, and we do the totals, and we say, here's how many kegs have shipped and what it means in terms of avoided carbon and avoided pounds of wasted landfills. I just think that's probably the thing that we get the most of. It just gives us an opportunity to have conversations with people. I mean, I loved your blog where you said that the most wasted bottle is the one in your tasting room. And that's an area that we don't understand why. From our perspective, every winery in California should have at least their best-selling wine on tap in their tasting room, and avoid all that sort of thing. It's just such an obvious part. Yeah, the sustainability conversations, and it's coming. I mean, for the public companies, they're going to have to report their greenhouse gases. And there's states where you can't, you're not, the bottle bills are going to be expanding into alcohol and wine bottles, and people are going to be facing the need to report on what they're doing to impact their carbon. And so, when we get quoted by somebody else as being the biggest contributor to their reduction in carbon last year, yeah, that's those sort of things are really nice. I won't mention a winery name that's a competitor of yours, but that was a really nice one to read too. It's like, hey, that's great.
We don't have wineries as competitors. We're all in
There
this
you
together.
go. Okay.
And I think one of the things that maybe people don't realize, I had Karen McNamara from Conscious Container on as a guest a couple of months ago. Like, people don't realize that just because a bottle ends up in a recycling bin, like, that is not necessarily a good outcome.
It's tragic. I was talking to the guy who owns the biggest recycling center in America, just outside New York. And he was very candid that the glass recycling is a money loser for them. He'd rather not see those bottles. And for people's information, 30% of the glass containers in America are actually recycled, or actually melted down. Most of the time, when they're in a recycling container, they get to the recycling center and they don't want to sort it into colors,
Right.
or if there are complications like some other material in the glass, or foils or something like that, they just go to the landfill. Now, it's not the worst thing in a landfill. It's an inert material in a landfill. It's not like plastic in a landfill.
Right.
But there's a lot of carbon associated with that glass, and since 70% of it doesn't actually get recycled, and a good chunk of it that ends up in those blue bins does not actually get recycled.
Yeah.
It's not like it melted down. It's not that the glass companies want to buy more recycled glass. For them, it's cheaper to make a bottle out of recycled glass. The melting point of the furnace is lower. They use less energy. The furnace lasts longer. They'd love to have 100% of the bottles recycled. They just aren't. And it's tragic. It's in this day and age, but the recycling center is going to lose money trying to sort through all that glass, put it into different colors, and make sure there's no contaminants in there before they can ship it to the glass plant. And they would rather see something else happen. And he was suggesting to me, hey, do you think you can take over the wine industry? I said, well, if we got to 2%, I'd be doing somersaults. If we get to 5%, that'd be fabulous for the environment. We're not going to get to 50.
Right. Yeah, and we're not, even like in our tasting room, we're not going to get to 100% pouring wine out of keg, because we always want to be able to pour older wines. And it's not that the wine that's, if it's been in keg for 2 years, isn't still going to be good, but it's going to be different than that same wine under cork. And we want to be pouring people what it would be when they buy it and take it home and put it in their cellar. So the goal is not to replace 100%.
Correct.
The goal is to replace all of the unnecessary packaging and all of the energy that goes into that where it makes sense, which is still a big percentage.
Which is your biggest volume, main thing. It's not your single vineyard designate. It's your mainstream wines. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So what's next for Free Flow or for you?
Well, for Free Flow, we always feel like we're at that point of inflection, that tipping point, where there's enough press out there about sustainability. There's enough places to go and see, self-pour at a hotel, or go to one of those restaurants like a 60 Vines that's got, so many wine taps and no bottles in the whole place. That you can send people to these places and they can see it in practice, that everyone, and the economics are compelling, that it's going to, we prepare ourselves for exponential growth. And we think it's coming. We think it's coming in tasting rooms. We think it's coming with beer conversions. I mean, the fast one for us this year is breakfast places. I mean, these guys with the bottomless mimosas who were opening dozens of bottles on a Saturday and Sunday morning and are now hooking up a keg of sparkling wine. for us, I mean, I think we've grown like 15,000 kegs in that one little niche in the last 6 months, because all these breakfast places have woken up and go, oh, it's so much better for us economically and hassle wise, not dealing with 37 empty heavy champagne bottles at the end of the day. Instead, I just hook up a couple of kegs and pour my bottomless mimosas all day. That's been an explosive growth for us. The hotels, the big national hotel chains are all on this. With self-pour concepts, you walk into the lobby and there's a wall with some beer and some wine and some cocktails out of a keg, and you swipe your key card and you get 5 ounces of an IPA or 2 ounces of a Malbec. It's a great idea. I talked to a food and beverage manager at one of the hotels, and he's like, I love this. I have so much less labor. The customers are entertained doing this for themselves, and my profitability is up, and it's so much easier to do. And I don't have that big waste stream trying to come out the back door of the hotel at the end of the day. So we feel in the next couple of years, like, we're not going to be continuing with the 25-30% growth. We're back above pre-pandemic levels. We think we're going to get into the period where this doubles, triples in a couple of years, which will lead to a whole bunch of other business challenges, fun business challenges, and that's what we're preparing ourselves for, because this feels like we're at that tipping point. Whether it's sustainability consciousness about the environment or compelling economics, but we're there. We're this close. It isn't like it was 5 years ago, where you had a lot of conversations with people, to your point, that said, oh, that's a good idea. It's an interesting idea. Now people are like, yeah, I've heard about it. I've seen it. It's pretty compelling. How do I do it? How do I actually go about implementing it? And that's part of our job now, as sort of the creator of the category and the brand ambassador, is to educate wineries, is to educate restaurant people, to educate, if a restaurant calls us and says, oh, how do I do this? It doesn't matter if they're in Sonoma or Arkansas. We're going to figure out like who's an installer and how do we get them a list of available wines, because we want this revolution to happen as fast as possible.
Super cool. Awesome. Well, it has already been more than half an hour. I really could hang out and talk to you about this all afternoon.
Well, we'll
but I don't
do that soon. We'll have a glass of wine and hang out and talk.
If people want to learn more about what Free Flow does, what's the best way for them to do that?
If they are a winery or a restaurant, go to our website, freeflowwines.com, and we have information there for someone who wants to start up. Give us a call. If they're a consumer and they want to try it, go to trywineontap.com. And Try Wine on Tap's got a map, and you can put in Cleveland or Reno, Nevada, and it'll show you locations around you that pour wine by the glass out of a keg. And so you can go to that establishment and give it a shot. And so that's the best way to learn, is to go to one of our 2 websites, and we love talking about it.
A comment just popped through saying that you should look into kegging kombucha. Have you not already done that?
We don't keg kombucha. We can refer you to someone who does. There are people who do soft drinks, cocktails, liquor as well. So our niche is wine, and we're going to stick to our knitting.
Awesome, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Rich. I appreciate you taking the time to join me, but even more, I appreciate your work in making this new category something exciting and viable and really worthwhile for everybody.
Well, right back at you. Everything you're doing in the vineyard, at the winery, we all admire you, and it's been an honor to be on with you.
Excellent.
Take care, Jason.
Cool. Well, thank you, Rich. And thank you, everybody who joined. I will be back in 2 weeks. My guest in 2 weeks will be Randy Caparoso, who is a wine writer and photographer, and is doing some really cool stuff. He's based in Lodi, so we'll get to talk about Lodi some. So, okay. Again, thanks, everybody. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Jason.
See you all in 2 weeks.
Take care.